All right, everybody. So let's start talking about, excuse me, program design for resistance training. It's this one and then the aerobic programming PowerPoint are going to be the two PowerPoints that I think will um, start to answer a lot of your questions that you may have regarding the programming assignment for the group project. Um, and this is what we're going to kind of base everything off of. You're going to understand after these what you need to do depending upon the level of training the person has, their goals, what your main overall goal is. So these are the chapters that are going to really play a key part in the programming portion. So you can look at the course object or chapter objectives. Basically, we're going to evaluate their sport requirements and assess the athlete, select their exercises based on their type, sport specificity, technique, so on and so forth. Determine a training frequency, arrange exercise in a training session, because that's just as important as well. Determining 1 rep max, predicted one rep max, repetition maximum loads. That's going to be the big key when I'm looking at your progressions, okay, and what you assign to somebody. Assigning load and repetitions, knowing when and by how much an exercise load should be increased. Assign training volumes, and then determine the rest period lengths based on the training goal. So what do we need? Some of the principles of the anaerobic exercise prescription. You need a needs analysis. You need a exercise selection, training frequency, exercise orders, training and load repetitions, volume, and rest periods. So the first portion is going to be that needs analysis. You have a needs analysis two-stage process that includes that evaluation of the requirements and characteristics of the sport. Basically, you're assessing the athlete. This is when we do some of our testing to just see, do you just randomly walk in and now, I mean, you will have some clients that are like this that have a specific goal in mind, so they may not understand themselves typically sometimes. Or you may have an athlete that walks in and says, all right, I need you to train me. All right, well, what do you need to work on? I don't know. Let's see. Well, you need to evaluate their needs. Maybe there's somebody that is pretty fast and everything else, but man, their strength is real low. Okay, well, their need at that current point in time is strength. And just because their need is strength this year doesn't mean that at the end of the next year, strength is going to be their need again. It can change all the time. That's why we constantly test individuals and evaluate them to see what their progression is. You're going to evaluate the sport as well. What's the movement analysis? Body and limb movement patterns, and the muscular involvement. If you're and it could be almost down to the position they play. Are you going to train a quarterback the same that you would train an offensive or defensive lineman? Well, no. There's certain portions that, yeah, they kind of match up, but at the end of the day, I don't care how much my quarterback can bench press because he's not doing that motion. Now, my offensive and defensive linemen are constantly doing that type of a motion. So that might be more of a core piece of what we want to work on. Physiological analysis. So what is their strength? What's their power look like? What, do they need to put on muscle mass? That's going to be in that hypertrophy. Or are they someone that requires more muscular endurance priority? Maybe they're strong as can be, but they can't last very long. Oddly enough, you can have people like that might not necessarily be an aerobic-based athlete, but let's take a sport, once again, something like football. They may be strong and they may have the power that they need, but what good does that person do if they are getting winded after 3 plays and I need them out there for at least 10? They don't do me very good. They don't do me well. Injury analysis. So finding out what are some of the common sites for joint and muscle injury, and what could be some of the factors that cause those injuries for their given sport. Because again, that may be a little small piece of your training is to strengthen up those joint areas to make sure that that is not something that starts to plague this individual. So when we assess the athlete, we need to know what their training status is. So, and that ranges for everybody. I don't care if they're an NFL football player or at their NFL, but what type of training have you been doing? What have you been doing for the last given time period? Because if you're coming to me and you need to build strength, obviously strength was not a big part of what you were originally doing. How long have they been doing that? What is the level of intensity involved? The degree of exercise technique experience. If it's something where they're, that's another thing. You want to know what is their, I guess you could say their knowledge of the gym and the exercises. Because if they have a wealth of knowledge about it, like they've been doing things, they just need somebody to help them get better at it or get stronger at it. Well, that puts me at a different training status than somebody who's like, what's a power clean? Because if you ask me that, well, then I know that I'm not going to start programming you with power cleans on day one. Or at least if I am, the intensity is going to be vastly different because I'm going to do more of a training aspect or a teaching aspect to start off with than I am going to be doing a true overall training. Okay. And now this is just an example of classifying where somebody's training status is. If there's somebody that's not training or just began training for less than 2 months for 1 to 2 days a week, they're considered pretty much a beginner or untrained. Okay, they have no technique or experience skill. And then as you can see, the more and more we have advanced or been training, we move into an intermediate and an advanced. And basically what that's doing is it's not a concrete portion, but it is kind of a groundwork or a foundation for how you build. If you're somebody who's had some comes in that is somewhat between that beginner and intermediate phase, well, then I know that I can't necessarily go balls to the wall 6 days a week, but maybe we can kind of fit into that 3, maybe push it to 4. You know what I mean? It's just kind of giving you an idea of what they're used to. So that way you don't go over and beyond. Because if you start going too over and beyond, we start to look back at that last chapter and we start to see that you get into that overtraining. It's not that gradual dip and increase that we want. You start to really just kind of plummet them into the ground is what it essentially is. When we're assessing the athlete, physical testing and evaluation, tests should relate to the athlete's sport. So once again, this is where I kind of get onto the stuff like the NFL Combine. They make offensive linemen run a 40-yard dash in a sprint type of stance, which they never get into. And then all they ever talk about, yeah, some of them, if they run it really fast, they talk about that. But they always just talk about, oh, they're 10 yards, the 10-yard split. How fast and how low did they stay for those initial 10 yards? Well, if that's the case, why don't we put them in a stance that they're normally going to be in and then test it, right? That's where you start to really see. And some people get very hung up on certain numbers that, yes, a 40-yard dash is going to tell me how fast you are straight line. But that's when you start to also get the differences between what people call workout speed or, status versus game speed. I'm running a 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine in, sliding shorts and a skin-tight T-shirt. But when I get on the field, I have at least another 20 pounds worth of equipment and uniform that's kind of restricting a little bit of my movement. How fast am I then, right? So you got to make sure that the tests are relating to the sport, or at least what you're using them for is going to help them in their specific sport. Um, if they have normative values for things, try to compare it to that. If you're looking at people that are trying to go from high school to college or college to the pros, typically there's places to find what the typical Division I athlete for that given sport and position, what their typical numbers are for the drills that you should be using that are very similar, right? And compare them to that and say, all right, we're good on these three, but wow, your strength or your agility needs to be improved. Well, guess what we're going to be making as the foundation of our program this upcoming time around? Speed and agility. Okay. Primary resistance training goal. Typically to improve strength, power, hypertrophy, or muscular endurance, you concentrate on one training outcome per season, meaning that typically while the training program is going to incorporate all 4 phases of it, you're not going to sit there and say, well, we're going to improve all of these this spring. You're likely just not going to do it. So what you need to do is, take the pieces that fit them best together and say, look, I can't improve everything right away, but to get you ready for next year to improve, right? I'm going to pick out this 1 or 2 things that we can definitely get done that's going to improve your performance. And then when we come back around, we'll start working on everything else. Why? Because if you start to go too in-depth and to have too many loads on them, they're either not going to make the progressions that you want and they're going to get frustrated, or you're never going to spend enough time on the pieces that you need to be spending on for the adaptations to occur. So when we look at this, again, we've talked about this during the off season. So you're not doing a lot of sports practice. Generally, it's typically your resistance training or your training period. The biggest goal typically is going to be hypertrophy and muscular endurance at the very beginning. What does that mean? It means that we want to build more lean mass and make the musculature a little bit more endurance, be able to handle what we need to put onto it, right? Because as we start to make a muscle bigger, inherently we've already made it a little stronger. And if we have that, then we move into that aspect of putting on strength and power at the very end. That way we've gained muscle mass, and now we're going to take that muscle mass that's productive and make it stronger. So now we have everything involved. When we get to the preseason, your practice for sport increases a little bit more than that of the off season. Your resistance training kind of decreases a little bit because of that increase in sport practice. So what we need to do is we need to make it more sport specific at this point, meaning strength, power, or muscular endurance, depending on the sport. We're not going to get hypertrophy. It's just typically not going to happen. That needs to be one of the main foci or focuses during that off season when there's not a lot of sport practice and it's more just in the gym technically. And then when we get in season, it's maintenance. So what we're trying to do in that off season and part of that preseason is to build us up to a certain point, because we know that once our training goes down during season, we're going to lose things. If you look at different athletes, when I talk about maintaining, there's individuals in the NFL that by the time the season begins versus when it ends at the end of the year, some of them are almost, and it's like typically your bigger individuals because others don't have anywhere to lose it. But, they end up losing near 15, 20 pounds in a season. Why? Well, because we don't have the amount of training anymore that we're typically going through. So part of it, they're inactive a little bit because they're trying to recover from the rigors of the game. So we try to build them up in that off season and preseason. That way, instead of being way down here at the end, maybe by the end of next season, we're only down to here, if that makes sense to you. And then in the postseason, it varies. It's not specific. Just include activities other than sports skill or resistance training. Something that just maintains activity, or at the very least, it's an active rest to help all those injuries and everything that accrue over the season kind of heal up, because there's nothing worse than nagging injuries. And when I say nagging injuries, like hamstring soreness or this or that, or the bumps and bruises that end up changing some of our mobility throughout the season, if we let those progress, it does hinder our training in the coming seasons. So let them have some active rest and recover. That way, when they get into the off season, sure, we're starting at a lower point, but at least we have a better tank to go with. We're near 100% versus working with only 75%. Step 2, you're going to look at your exercise selections. So choosing the exercises requires knowing the movement and muscular requirements of the sport. Like I said, it could be based on the position they play. The athlete's exercise technique experience, equipment available, that's a big one. Sure, if you go to any of the SEC level, training areas, yeah, they have just about anything you could ever imagine under the sun to be able to train with. But go take a look over at the Kingsville, A&M Kingsville weight room. We don't have everything, nor do we have the amount of equipment to just section off a single sport to be able to work in there. Everybody has to use it. So it's pretty much a universal type of equipment setup. So you have that. Or what if you test somebody at your gym and you're using something super specific and they're like, okay, well, the gym that I go to doesn't have that. What are you supposed to do? Well, you need to test them on something at least that's similar, or when you're programming them, make sure that you understand that what equipment they're using, so you're not prescribing them things that they're just going to cross off the list and say, well, I don't have the means or the ability to do that, so can't do that. If you start doing that too much, then you're missing all your aspects of training. And the amount of training time available, that's also a big key. Because if I sat there and I tell you that I have 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, let's say, and I say I'm only good for 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., so 1 hour in the mornings, do not start scheduling me for 4 or 5 days a week or multiple times throughout the day, or creating a daily workout that requires me to be in the gym for an hour and a half to 2 hours almost. Why? I'm not going to get it done because I've already told you I've got 3 days, 1 hour each of those days. So make sure when you're doing that, so that to kind of re-answer a question I think I answered yesterday, it might actually be more important to make sure that you have your rest periods in there so you know how much time you're taking each and every workout. That way you're not just sitting there saying, oh, well, I programmed you 20 exercises because it looked cool and I think you got it. I only have time for 10. Okay? So making sure that you stick with what your individual has available to them. Exercise types. So we have our core exercises, and that is not abs, guys. Core as in your foundational pieces, okay? Your big exercises. These are going to recruit one or more large muscle areas. So that's stuff like deadlifts, squats, bench press, incline press, all those big, basically your core exercises are the ones that you lift the most amount of weight with, okay? Involve 2 or more primary joints, receive priority because of their direct application to the sport. That also may include your Olympic lifts or your power lifts, so power clean, clean and jerks, snatch, all that. That's your core. That's what you want at the very beginning. Why? Because they incorporate such large muscle mass areas and so many primary joints, they take a lot of energy from the participant, and you're also lifting a lot more weight. I would hope that you're bench pressing more than what you can bicep curl. Okay, so you work all those big pieces first, and then we move into those what we call the assistance exercises. So they recruit smaller muscle areas. So they only include one joint. So that's going to be your triceps, your bicep curls, your knee extensions, knee flexions, all those little accessory, where we start to isolate certain areas, those need to be secondary. Okay. Your core needs to take premise, then we go into those assistants. Okay. Then you start to look at your structural exercises, emphasize loading the spine directly or indirectly, and your power exercises. So structural exercises are performed very quickly or explosively. Once again, those need to go at the beginning. Think about it this way. If I'm wanting you to put a big load on the back, right, and loading the spine or whatever it might be, are you going to want to be tired from all these little other exercises that you've been doing? No, you shouldn't, because then it's going to take away from your form from a exercise that requires a lot more energy and a lot more safety and technique based to it, right? Or if you're looking at power and you want to be quick and explosive, I want my body to be 100% charged, essentially, to be able to explode off the ground onto a box for box jumps. If I go through an entire leg day of lifting and my legs are, essentially fatigued heavily, and you try to tell me to go do box jumps, that's not good to end a program with. Odds are I'm not going to make it up. I'm going to toe the box, and then there go my shins. If you've ever seen it happen, trust me, you won't want to program it that way. Do all that stuff at the beginning. Make your power huge and big at the top, and then work into stuff. Okay? Movement analysis. So sport-specific exercises. The more similar the training activity is to your actual sport, the greater the likelihood it will be a positive transfer to that sport. Meaning, if I'm doing, let's say for a golfer, if my training is more rotational based and lower body and stuff like that, guess what? That transfers over to their sport. But if I'm working and doing, offensive lineman, for instance, and you tell me to go run 10 miles a day, what's the sport specific aspect of that? Now that's a gross, example, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say, hopefully. That concept is called the specificity or specific adaptation to impose demands, basically saying that the demands that I'm imposing on my body, I will start to adapt to that. Meaning, if you keep telling me to do certain things, whether it's, I don't know, dragging a tire or whatever it is, I'll start adapting to that. That's why I was telling whatever group I was talking to the other day, while each of you are doing kind of a separate phase within your entirety of your program, you want things that kind of filter over and overlap each other, because what good am I doing if I'm programming you for 6 weeks of certain exercises and then that next 6 weeks, it's completely different exercises, right? And then we come back over here in 6 weeks and we start to put some of those other ones back in. You've essentially gone 6 weeks without it. So you want things to kind of flow together. That way, all those adaptations I'm working throughout the entirety of the program are being able to take hold. And here's just an example, certain things that kind of mimic different sport movements. And so what some of the exercises are. Don't worry, I'm not going to sit there and ask you, all the different, give me all the exercises for a racket stroke. Just understand, like, this is how you go and you take something from a sport and make it over into something that's in the gym. Okay. Muscle balance. You want that agonist and antagonist to be somewhat balanced. Why? Well, because if I get one side of it too big or too strong and the other portion is not strong enough to withhold it, then it's not going to do the job of slowing that movement down. So we run the risk of a greater risk of injury at that point. Exercises to promote recovery. Do not involve high muscular stress or high stress on the nervous system. Promote movement and restoration. So including types of recovery exercises that just maybe get blood flow, right? No real stress, no real stress on the nervous system of the body, just a little movement to get blood flow. Exercise technique experience. Do not assume that an athlete will perform an exercise correctly. Even if they are somebody that is, like I said, if you have somebody that's a college athlete that's getting out and ready to come to the pros and they're training with you, don't assume that they're doing that right. Okay. Odds are a lot of the time athletes will get by based off of athletic ability, that they don't really know that they're doing something completely wrong, when in likelihood they might be. So don't assume just because of their training status that they understand it. Work through them and let them progress with you. And if you see that they have that ability, then you can start programming more into it. Knowing that availability of the resistance training equipment and the available training time per session. I've kind of all hit on all those points already. Making sure, but when you're looking at the time, make sure you prioritize time efficient exercises, meaning a couple different things. If my main goal is lower body strength, for instance, or whatever it might be, and I have somebody that has limited time, maybe it's disregarding some of those assistance exercises that are like, bicep curls and all that. Maybe I'm just working heavy on the bench press, chest press, squats, leg press, making sure what they're doing equates to the end goal rather than just filling it with stuff that's going to be time waster, essentially. It's not necessarily a time waster, but it is if someone's on a crunch time, right? Being okay that if you give me these 8 exercises, if I don't have the time today, I'm cutting these last 4 out because they're not part of the primary goal right now. Okay, that's fine. As long as we're not doing it consistently, that's fine. Training frequency is the number of training sessions completed in a given time period. For a resistance training program, common time period is 1 week. So your frequency, you're looking at what it is per week, okay? Training status affects the number of rest days needed between sessions. A frequency of 3 workouts per week is recommended for many athletes to allow sufficient recovery between sessions. Also, that depends upon your workout compilation, essentially. And I think we're about to get into that. Yeah, so think about it this way. If you're looking at a beginner, typically 3 days a week is fine. So you're typically, let's just say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay, and that's all we're doing, Monday, Wednesday, Friday every week. Okay, that's fine. What gets tricky is when somebody tells you that they can do more. How you incorporate rest days? Because let's say you do push pull Monday, or push on Monday, pull on Tuesday, rest, push on or Thursday, rest on, or pull on Friday. Those work out. But if you start really messing with days, now all of a sudden things don't line up the right way. Or if someone tells you they only have Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Fridays available, if you start to program certain ways and you work with the week, right, and you just keep saying, oh, I'm just going to put 1 day in between everything. Well, guess what? Now all of a sudden I go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. You start to see where your problem starts to lie. If they're not available to work out on the weekend or on Wednesdays, they're not going to be able to do a lot of your program. So be careful with that, when you start to program things. The more highly resistance trained you are, the more you can augment their training or change their training by using split routines. So here's just a couple of different ones. You can go lower body, upper body. That's a good way to do it. And you can go 4 times a week. The reason, even if it's a beginner, you can do that because look at what you're doing. You're hitting all their lower body on Monday, and that lower body gets basically 2 days of rest before it's ever hit again. So that works for even a beginner, okay? You can start getting it to where you start to group things that are like movements or at least similar muscle groups. Chest, shoulders, triceps, then your lower body, back and biceps, okay? But look at what starts to happen. When do you train back again? Well, now it's going to be on Sunday, and then your rest day is on Monday. Then you go 3 days and then a rest day. So be careful and be cautious of that when you are putting a time together and what the frequency is going to be, okay? Sports season. Seasonal demands of the sport may limit the time available, okay? So typically and more than likely, I think all of you are going to make your program for something that's similar to the off season. I mean, I know that it's almost 24 weeks. That's almost half a year, but you get what I'm saying. But just understand that training frequency changes throughout the season or throughout the year, actually. If you're in the off season, your main goal is training 4 to 6 times a week is fine. But look, as it starts to move down, we start to decrease. So that's why these off-season type workouts are very important, and that's where they have a big chunk of what that overall goal is going to be. Training load and exercise type. Athletes who train with maximal or near maximal loads require more recovery time before the training session. So you're going to probably put a little bit more strain on them if you are not going to be hitting a certain muscle group for another 2 to 3 days, right? Training frequency is influenced by the overall amount of physical stress. So just because you have it encountered what you have or you have it calculated what you're doing, also understand you need to know what everything they're doing. If you have a coach that's about to run them to the ground, maybe you need to take that into account and change your training style. So that way they have some recovery time and you're not just beating athletes into the ground. Making sure that they're not somebody that is, obsessed with their training to where you have a pretty good training program plus their practice, and then they're also like, oh yeah, and I also run like 5 to 10 miles a day. Well, if you're doing that, then we're definitely not getting you any stronger because those strength gains take a back seat to aerobic training. Okay, you need to have an understanding of what all is happening for this person. Exercise order, kind of started hit on that, but you're going to do power, other core exercises, then those little assistant exercises. If you're doing upper and lower body, alternating, one method of providing the opportunity athletes to recover more fully between exercises is to alternate, go upper body, then a lower body, upper body, then a lower body. Push and pulls, alternating, right? Supersets and compound sets. Superset is something that involves 2 sequentially performed exercises that stress 2 opposing muscles or muscle areas, meaning an antagonist and an agonist. So bicep curl, tricep extension. A compound set involves for the same muscle group. So push-ups and bench press, okay? Those would be a compound set. When we look at the mechanical work, it's force times displacement. So how much force am I putting out versus how far did I move it? Volume load is a practical measure for the quantity of work performed in resistance training. Volume load equals the number of weight units times the repetitions completed. So you can assume somebody's volume load by what you're programming, saying, if 50% is 100 pounds times 10 reps. Well, guess what? That's 1,000 pounds for that one set times 5 sets. That's 5,000 pounds of volume that you've put onto that body. Okay, so you can add it that way. That's an assumed volume load. An actual volume load is going to be whatever weight they utilized times whatever they completed. Okay? So the arrangement of your repetition and sets can affect the intensity value and the measure of quality work that's going to be performed. The relationship between load and repetitions, the heavier the load, the lower the number of repetitions need to be. Load is commonly characterized by a 1 rep max. So a load simply is just the amount of weight assigned to an exercise set. So 100 pounds for your bench press, that's a load. 1 RM is the greatest amount of weight that can be lifted with proper technique for 1 repetition. And then rep max is the most weight lifted for a specified number of repetitions. Okay? When you start to look at it and you start to break down the number of repetitions that you want your individual to complete, think about it this way. And I will utilize this when I'm grading your stuff. That if you tell me that I want them to do, 93% for 8 reps, that ain't happening. I'm telling you right now, at most for 93%, the most you can do is say, I want you to do 4 and maybe try to push to a 5th, especially if you're getting towards a portion of your training program where testing is about to occur, because they should have been adapting over that amount of time. Okay. So when you start looking at it, think about it this way. When you start telling somebody that they're going to do 20 reps, that's less than 50% of whatever 1 rep max that is. And typically you're not going to be doing 1 rep maxes for all those assistant exercises. Your 1 rep maxes are for your big heavy lifts. If you want to sit there and tell me that you want it to be a self-selected weight for bicep curls, that's fine. But it needs to make sure that you are, what they're doing is of an appropriate rep range for what you want them to do. If I want stronger biceps, it needs to be heavier and my reps need to be lower. If I want bigger biceps, my weight needs to be, middle of the road, kind of in that 75 percentile, and go for 12 reps, 10 reps, okay? Testing the 1 RM, basically you can do it however you want to do it. Just make sure that the tests are similar all the time. And choose what can accurately and consistently assess muscular strength. Typically we use leg press, bench press, squat, deadlift, okay? Or you can move over and do power cleans. That's going to be more power based, okay? So those big lifts. You can estimate a 1 RM using a table. You can also do, look up, 1 RM calculator. How many repetitions did you do? Oh, I did 12. What was the weight you were using? 50 pounds. All right, so your estimated 1 RM is going to be whatever it might be, maybe 75 pounds. Okay, there's multiple ways to figure it out based off of what you have available to you. Assigning load and repetitions based on that training goal. So again, you need to understand what the repetition continuum is. So here's what you're going to be looking at. This is different ways to determine the 1 rep max. Typically in a in-person setting, we'd kind of go over this a little bit more and have a little bit more hands-on with it. But using that repetition continuum, that's going to be where you understand the set or the repetitions that are associated with different forms or different phases. I think I have it. Yeah, here we go. So even if you look at this picture, the big bolded words, that's what those rep ranges are going to be primarily working. So anywhere between 2 and 6 reps is going to be strength based. 2 to 5 is going to be power. At 6 on the low end, upwards of 12 is going to be hypertrophy. And then anything above 12 really is going to be muscular endurance. So also my percentages go higher up here. And as I move down this way with the reps, it gets lower, okay? But here's the deal. Even if I'm working on my strength, I'm technically hitting all 4 phases at some way, some point. Because let's think about it this way. If I keep doing strength-based work and I'm adapting and getting stronger, haven't I also built a little bit of muscular endurance to decrease the intensity and go for more reps? Yeah, I have. That's muscular endurance. Now, it's not pure muscular endurance, but it's a little bit. So that's why even down here, we start to see that word muscular endurance involved. And yeah, if I'm doing heavy things on muscular endurance, a little bit of strength is involved as well. Okay, so you're never not doing something. Percentage of that 1 RM, the relationship between the percentage of the 1 RM and the estimated number of repetitions, making sure that those fit. You can always go about 1 to 2 repetitions over it. Like I said, if you wanted to go 90% and tell me to go for 6 reps, I'm okay with that. That falls in line. But if you really start getting above that, that's too heavy for too many reps. So again, if you start looking at this will kind of help give you what's your goal repetition, and how does it equate over to what phase you're doing or what that exercise is looking to be contributing to the most. Again, if you want to look at this, assigning load and rep based on the training goal. You can have heavy days where you have pretty near maximums, followed by light days where it's just, again, almost like a recovery day. Timing load increases. As the athlete adapts, the training stimulus and load needs to be increased. I mean, if you want to get stronger, you need to push it into stronger weights. And you need to monitor it. If there's constantly hitting your goals of 6 repetitions of, I don't know, 90%, and they're doing it almost with ease, they need to bump up a little bit, or we need to go back in and it's time to get testing again, because that 1 RM has definitely changed. Or if they're constantly struggling to complete what you're trying to do, then maybe you've jumped too high, or maybe they had just a good day on their testing and that's not really where they need to be physiologically. 2 for 2 rule. A conservative method, if the athlete can perform 2 or more repetitions over his or her assigned rep goal in that last set on 2 consecutive workouts for a given exercise, weight should be added to that exercise for the next training session. Pretty simple. Progression of the training load. Relative load increases of 2.5 to 10% can be used in place of absolute values. Basically, here's the gist of it. You can add weight and the percentages to the upper body, but it's going to go at a slower pace than that of the lower body. The upper body is strong, but it's not as strong as the lower body. So that lower body will adapt a little faster sometimes, and you'll be able to put bigger loads on quicker than you would on the upper body. And if you look at it this way, and even those numbers down here for larger, stronger, more trained, I mean, you think about it, when you're larger, stronger, and more trained, 250 pounds to 260 pounds on like a bench press, that's a big jump, right? Or 330 to 345, 350, that's a big jump, okay? So just because it doesn't look like a lot, put it into perspective, okay? These are just some definitions of what we've talked about with volume, sets, repetitions, and volume loads. Multiple versus single sets. Single set training may be appropriate for untrained individuals or during the first several months of training. Yeah, but I don't always agree with it. I think you can stress somebody with a few sets if you're properly putting the right number of repetitions and percentages with it. That higher volumes are necessary to promote further gains. If I only do one little thing, I'm not going to get stronger. I'm not going to grow muscle mass. I'm not really going to get any endurance with it either. So you need to really stress it in a safe manner. Again, a lot of that depends upon how you're programming and how you're setting everything up. Primary resistance training goal, again, that's going to be a big key to the volume. So if you're looking at, the different phases or portions, this is going to tell you what's your goal repetitions and how many sets do you need to do, okay? And that's how you start to build upon your program and number of exercises that you do, okay? Again, I've kind of hit on all of this. Hit on that as well. Okay, so when we look at our rest periods, obviously, here's what's going to happen. If you're trying to build strength, those are going to have the longest, strength and power will have the longest amount of time in between sets. Why? Typically, we're using either heavy loads with strength or we're trying to be as explosive as possible with power. If that's our goal, then they need more time so our body can recover itself. All right, kind of looking back on that bioenergetics aspect of everything. When we start moving into hypertrophy, that needs to be a little shorter. Why? Well, if I'm trying to grow muscle, I need to put more stress and strain on it. So I'm trying to get more work done in a smaller amount of time, and it doesn't need to be at 100%. And typically, hypertrophy comes from assistance exercises more than it does, your big core exercises. And then if I'm looking for endurance, that really gets short, like 30 seconds short. Why? Well, what better way do you do endurance than to continue trying to move, going and going and going and going and going and going, right? So that all plays a part in your rest periods during all these programs. Okay. Again, just talked about that. Strength and power. You just need to go to 2 to 5 minutes in between sets. So if you're telling me that I'm doing 6 sets, okay, that's almost 30 minutes of rest. So almost 30, hopefully with the number of repetitions, probably roughly 35 minutes total is going to be those 6 sets of strength and power. Okay, so start to see how that starts to add up. So that's resistance training programming. The next video will be about aerobic training, and hopefully that will give you a good foundation to start with your training programs. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I will definitely Zoom meeting a group, okay, to answer anything you need. All right? Keep an eye out on the next one. Have a good one.